I'll make sure that you've gone live and I'll disappear as well.
Thank you. We are now streaming live on YouTube, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's special meeting of the Boston Town Area Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Goodall, and I'm the chairman of this committee. We have a number of special guests present tonight. Welcome to you all, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Now, to ensure members of the public are clear who is taking part in the meeting, I will ask Jeanette to take a roll call of everyone present. Sorry about that. Jeanette, could you please take the roll call?
Thank you, Chairman. Would attendees simply indicate they are present? Committee members first. Councillor Alison Austin.
Present.
Councillor Alan Bell.
Present.
Councillor Anton Danny.
Present.
Councillor Anne Dorian.
Present.
Councillor Martin Griggs.
Present.
Councillor Neil Hasty.
Present.
Councillor Martin Howard.
Present.
Councillor Brian Rush.
Present.
Councillor Yvonne Stevens.
Present.
Councillor Stephen Woodliffe.
Present.
Thank you. The officers present are the Assistant Director and Lead Officer for this committee, Phil Perry.
Present.
Are you there? Thank you. And also the Assistant Director for Regulation, Chris Allen.
Good evening.
Thank you. And myself, Jeanette Collier, clerk to this committee. The guests present are Chief Superintendent Chris Davison.
Good evening.
Hello. Chief Inspector James Trafford.
Good evening.
And Chief Constable Bill Skelly.
Good evening. Hopefully as pleasant as I am present.
Thank you very much, sir. And we have Matt Warman MP.
I think he's just come up as left.
Ah, right. Trying to make connection. We're also waiting for Mark Jones, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and hopefully they'll be joining us soon. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. We will now move into part one of the this evening's agenda and address the preliminary items. Firstly, to receive apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Vivienne Edge, and Councillor Evans will also be arriving late at approximately 7 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. B, to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of September 2020. If any members wish to query the accuracy of the minutes, please indicate now by using the raised hand button.
Councillor Dorian is indicating, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Councillor Dorian.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to query the accuracy of the minutes. I just felt it was an opportune moment to say that this meeting is very laggy, as my students say. I'm really struggling with internet connection. It would help if people turned the cameras off if they're not speaking, Mr. Chair. Not you, but everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorian. If members who weren't speaking could turn their cameras off, if that would help. It is a bit choppy this evening. Thank you. Well, I will, as there are no queries, I will take it I have the agreement to sign the minutes. Do any members have any interest to declare in this evening's meeting?
No members indicating, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you. To answer any written public questions, are there any?
There are none, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Now that concludes the preliminary items, and before we move into part two of this agenda, I would just like to reiterate that members need to indicate that they wish to speak by using the raised hand button only. Please do not simply raise your own hand, especially now you're all off and I can't see you. But thank you. Anyway, just before we move into the rest of the business this evening, I have actually been informed this is Jeanette's last evening clerking for Btac. She won't be present with us at our next meeting. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you, Jeanette, for all your hard work for this committee. Personally, I would like to thank you for keeping me in order and keeping all my papers up to date. It is a heartfelt thank you. And I would like, on behalf of the committee, to wish you well and join us in the long holiday.
Thanks very much. I appreciate
That's my pleasure.
that, Chairman.
That's fine. Right.
And thank you.
You're more than welcome. Now, this evening, there is only one item of business for the meeting, and that is the police response to the illegal encampment. The report is on page number 5 of the agenda report package. On the 24th of September 2020, the committee received a report relating to an illegal encampment that took place in the open space of Woodville Road, Boston, during July-August 2020. The report set out the timeline of the council's dealings with the illegal encampment, which included the actions of council officers, and the report made to the police and police responses, details of the condition of the site afterwards and costs of clearing it up. The report is attached at Appendix A. For reference, and the minutes of the meeting are those of the committee has just been approved in the preliminaries. During the meeting, we heard that the actions of the local police team during the incursion have been faultless. However, they were not satisfied with the regional response of Lincolnshire Police, and it was agreed to hold a special meeting and invite representatives of Lincolnshire Police, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and Mr. Warman, our MP, in order that members put their concerns to them. And I thank you for joining us this evening. It was very good of you to give up your time. Thank you. I'll kick it off. The committee took the decision to fence off Woodville Road and look at security of the sites and try and prevent illegal encampments. Obviously, what's in place at present is inadequate, and I would like to invite our guests to share with us their views on the way forward to policing these encampments in future and reassuring people of local businesses of the town. I hope you've all had copies of the questions, but I would just move on to the ones for my questions from me to the officers involved. On the 4th of August, the decision was taken by the police not to visit the site again, despite officers being threatened with physical violence. If officers asked the NAVICS to conduct vehicle checks. The reason given, the police did not have adequate resources to deal with large-scale disorder, which was believed likely to have happened. Obviously, questions arising from that is, were there extra resources available in the county? If so, couldn't they have been deployed? If not, was assistance available from neighbouring police authorities? And more importantly, is do we have enough resources in Boston today if this incident was repeated? I will hand over first to Chief Superintendent Chris Davison to comment. If you would, please, Chief Superintendent Davison.
Thank you, Councillor Goodell, and thank you for inviting me tonight.
My pleasure.
If it works for this committee, I would like to just set out some context. Then, of course, I will answer the question. So, firstly, by way of introduction, I am Chief Superintendent Chris Davison. I am the person responsible for local policing on the east of the county. My office is in Boston. I've spent 2/3 of my 24 years as a police officer working in and around Boston and South Holland. So firstly, thank you very much for your very kind words about the actions of the local officers. It is very much appreciated. I thought it useful actually to give a summary of the police actions before I go into some of the context around the decision making. I've read the report, read the legal report which accompanied the papers, and I have some comments which I think may be helpful to the committee as well. So, by way of description of police actions, and I will try and keep this as brief as I can. At 12:54 on the 31st of July, you will know that we received a non-urgent telephone call from a member of the public reporting that travellers had moved onto the green space known as Recreation Ground, located off Woodville Road and Sleaford Road, Boston. We created an incident on our computer system, and that remained the master incident for the period of the encampment. The report was initially titled, "Travellers on the Green, 3 to 4 caravans pulled up half an hour ago, have notices not to be there." And approximately 20 caravans subsequently moved onto the land during that day. A total of 21 vehicles were recorded by officers when we attended. The travellers left the site, as you know, at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 5th of August. Now, in terms of our initial call, at 12:54, we had the initial call. At 13:17, our force control room assigned the Boston duty sergeant. So there is always a sergeant responsible for initial reports of this nature. That sergeant at the time was committed with another incident, which was a high-risk absconder from North Sea Camp, which was one of the inquiries that was ongoing throughout this period. The neighbourhood policing team, through Sergeant Dickinson, was aware of the incident, and throughout this time, we made repeated visits to the site. So for members who may not be au fait with the way that we are organised within the service in Boston, within the uniform section, there are 2 branches, if you will. Response policing, which responds to calls for service, and neighbourhood policing, which is our community-based policing, who are community beat managers, who are police constables, and PCSOs. Both of those sections were charged with visiting the site, and on every day they were visited on no less than 3 occasions during every one of our main shifts, which are earlies, lates, and nights. After the initial response by local police, we took the following action. We carried out regular passing attention and engagement to the site. The incident was passed from each sergeant in terms of having a consistent briefing about what was required. At 17:47 hours on Monday, the 3rd of August, Sergeant Criminal Public Order Act 1994 papers were served on the occupants. A court date of the 6th of August had been set. At 12:55 hours, as you know, Sergeant Odlin attended with Ian Dunn from Boston Borough Council. This followed a fire at that location in the early hours. Boston Borough Councillor Panford Tim Booth, a representative of NABSIS, to attend the location and inspect the caravans. Members of the travelling community at the location told Mr. Dunn that if that was to happen, fingers would be broken if the caravans were touched. Tensions were noted as being very high by our community tension assessment. They further advised that if they had further visits, they would get another 50 caravans to attend the location. And the senior officer at the time was Inspector Waters. He was contacted. He advised officers were not to re-attend the site with Tim Booth and await the court hearing on the 6th of August. This was due to being insufficient resources to deal with any escalation to violence, something that was deemed probable, particularly in the wake of the arson. The duty late turn sergeant further updated on the 4th of August at 23:33 hours that due to huge demand during the shift, it'd been difficult to pass attention to the recreation grounds. And as you know, the caravans moved off during the evening of the 5th of August. So my interpretation of the decision taken by the inspector. The court result was due on the 6th of August, and the local authority was quite rightly leading on the use of powers under CGPOA, and therefore that process was still underway. While there was criminality, and there was a volume of calls, which I'll come on to later, there were no indictable offences, i.e. those that are deemed serious by the Crown Court committed or pointed towards that traveller location. The COVID-19 restrictions meant that we have been trying to minimise unnecessary contact, which could have meant large amounts of officers having to isolate for periods of 2 weeks or more. There was insufficient immediately available resources to deal with any large-scale disorder. And regional colleagues with whom we would generally ask for policing assistance were in states of heightened demand, for example, the lockdown in Leicester. Inspector Waters, therefore, had considered the necessity, proportionality and legality of the use of 61 powers. The fact that Section 61 powers exist does not equate to police being obliged to use them, and we use all of our powers proportionately and necessarily. A large-scale disorder in a children's play area which is close to residents and businesses may have resulted in more damage and reputational issues for Boston. Policing principles are to operate by balancing the need to take action through the lens of using the least possible necessary force in order to do so. Use of Section 61 CGPOA powers on the day that an attempted arson had happened when authority-led applications were in train and due to be heard on the 6th of August would have resulted in a confrontation, likely violent, between men, women, children and police, where that may not have been necessary at that point. And while I note the comments made by Mr. Goldsborough in his report, specifically on the final page, that the police have access to stab-proof vest, body-worn camera, handcuffs, baton, CS and taser, this is a reading of the situation that does not cover decision-making or practicalities. Public order policing is not as simple as having handcuffs and a stab-proof vest. That a legal power exists is merely one part of the decision-making process for police. We are also bound to consider likely threat, harm and risk to all parties, use least possible force and be able to defend our subsequent use of force. This is in accordance with the available guidance via the National Police Chiefs Council document on the policing of unlawful encampments, 2018. At 18:24 hours, on Wednesday, the 5th of August, a visit conducted by officers noted that half of the caravans at the location were hitched up, appearing ready to leave. The members of the travelling community subsequently vacated the recreation grounds over the following couple of hours. At 06:30 on the 6th of August, the outgoing nighttime sergeant updated that an area search had been conducted to try and trace where the travellers had moved to, as they had all vacated. During this period, we received a total of 38 calls made to Lincolnshire Police, reporting incidents purportedly relating to this unauthorised encampment. 37 were made by members of the public, and 1 was made by a member of the travelling community. We recorded a total of 14 recordable offences, which were linked to the travelling community, those being either public order offences, criminal damage or theft from shop. 1 offence was reported by a member of the travelling community, i.e. an arson. No arrests were made linked to this encampment or vehicles seized. During this period, high demand other than this encampment was also faced by local officers during each shift. So during the same period, there were around 420 calls for service in Boston, including 70 allegations of assaults, 26 concerns for welfare, 28 suspicious incidents, 2 firearms incidents, 5 burglaries, 2 robberies, and 4 frauds, none of which were linked to the traveller encampment. What could we have done differently? There are a number of ways in which I think we could have worked together more efficiently. Firstly, in the event of a large-scale traveller encampment, we should have had a multi-agency decision-making group. This is suggested in the Joint Protocol 2018, which exists between Lincolnshire Police and several local authorities. I understand that Boston Borough Council did not sign up to this protocol, but know that officers from Boston Borough Council are helping to refresh this protocol and will no doubt bring it back to elected members in due course. I have used this in the past when I worked in other parts of the county, and I have found it to be very useful, so that each agency comes to a joint decision around what tactics will be used and understands the rationale behind use of powers. This prevents misinformation and misunderstanding between us as agencies when we should be standing shoulder to shoulder. I would ask us as partners in the future to have this kind of multi-agency meeting at senior level, where the police attendee would be an officer not lower than chief inspector, in order to facilitate this closer joint working. And as an example, the current protocol states the lead authority will vary depending on the location and circumstances of the unauthorised encampment. The district council will be the lead authority in respect of an authorised camping on common land, land owned or the responsibility of the district council. The lead authority will visit the group to gather information and organise rubbish collection and carry out welfare assessments. And where requested, the police will attend with the officer from the lead authority. I would envisage that we will always send an officer to accompany our colleagues from Boston Borough Council. It goes on. A case conference meeting will be convened by the lead authority to decide whether to tolerate the encampment, to invoke police powers, or take legal action to remove the trespassers. The lead authority should invite representation from district and parish councils, police, education service, health service, gypsy and traveller representatives as appropriate. And then the lead authority will determine the course of action supported by others. On page 11, it states police, the Criminal and Justice Public Order Act 1994 confers discretionary powers on the police, and the decision to use these powers rests solely with the senior police officer present at the location. The police will only consider using their powers in exceptional circumstances where time taken to achieve other lawful methods of eviction would result in an unacceptable nuisance, criminality, or public order in which the trespassing occupation of the land is a relevant factor. The National Police Council Guidelines 2018 states the lead role for decision making should rest with the local authority, and the use of police powers should not normally be considered as a first response. And in this matter, the local authority response of legal proceedings were still underway and due to report a finding on the 6th of August. My recommendation at this point, Councillor Goodale, would be that Boston Borough Council may wish to consider signing the existing protocol to ensure that in the future we as partners work closer and enjoy closer decision making. One of the other things I've considered is our shop theft policy. We had a shop theft attendance policy in place which saw lower attendance by officers at allegations of shop theft where there were no readily identifiable lines of inquiry. But it is clear to me, as a consequence of this review, that we need to revisit that, and where there may be common offenders or community tensions, we need to attend in order to make sure that we have identified any possible offenders. And if I move to your questions, Councillor. So in order, we could have deployed further resources from within the county in the event that they were needed to deal with a confrontation. It was decided at that point that a confrontation would not have been justified and would have been counterproductive, not least because it was in the middle of a national pandemic. And to explain, conservatively estimating around 80 people being in that unlawful encampment, that would require a minimum of 160 police officers, i.e. More than a tenth of our total force. And therefore, had there been any COVID issues, we could have lost that number of members of our force for up to 2 weeks, of course. The use of mutual aid between forces is possible, but would have to be justified by the seriousness of an incident being dealt with. This would normally be the case for things like riots, high-risk demonstrations, and it is worth remembering that some of our local neighbours were dealing with local lockdown at the same time in their own force areas. And therefore, the policing of the pandemic meant that we would have had to look far further afield for support if required. And your final question, we do have sufficient resources within the county to deal with similar issues if we were working together as agencies in partnership. I think you had another question there, Councillor Goodale, around when we will see the increase in police numbers promised by the government. Would you like me to answer, or my part of that?
You can if you wish, Chief Superintendent. I didn't know whether Mark Jones of PPC wanted to answer it, but I'm quite happy for you to answer that now. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give it a go, and then we'll see what Mr. Jones says, if that's okay.
That's fine.
So some of those officers are in training. We are determining how many will come to Boston in the future. I can say that since the lockdown started, we've had an extra 9 officers to Boston, and there's a further 3 officers currently in training. And I'm not sure if members will have seen, but we have had a specific recruitment campaign for the east of the county. And I'm really keen that people who live in the east of the county, who can give something to their community, join us to work at Boston and the coast as well. So we've had a specific campaign for Boston and the east of the county.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Davison. Thank you. Do any other of our guests want to make a comment? Yes, Chief Constable Skelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. If at any point people can't hear me, because I do appreciate sometimes these meetings, the signal isn't great, please try and let me know. Thank you very much, Chris, for giving that kind of comprehensive overview. I'm not entirely sure if it was the case for the prosecution or the case for the defence. And realistically, I suppose, I'm hoping it's neither. I'm hoping that how Chris ended with the plea that we view these incidents in partnership, that we look to the protocol and the refreshing and signing of the protocol as a means by which we can jointly address when we see such antisocial behaviour and criminality appear on our doorstep or within the public spaces of Boston. And I can fully support the operational decisions that were made at the time. They're complex and they're difficult ones. Essentially, as Chris outlined, resourcing levels across the area, across the county, across the region, across the country are ones that we try and support each other when we are faced with unprecedented operational incidents. And if it had been felt necessary, then the officers on the ground can call upon their colleagues, and we will do our best to muster numbers in order to appropriately address the incident. But what they're managing is something where does that outweigh, or is that justifiable in the circumstances? And I think, as you've heard from Chris, our feeling was that on this occasion, it wasn't. In terms of the question of resourcing, perhaps if I give you a kind of force overview in general, we've been acutely aware of the need to have additional police officers in the Boston area and indeed right across the county. Mark, who's on this meeting, and myself, we worked hard to pressure government in order to realise the case for Lincoln. Unfortunately, that continues to be a real challenge. But with the announcement last year of government's commitment to an uplift of 20,000 officers, we immediately embarked upon recruitment. There is a time delay between recruiting an officer and them being able to be what is called a deployable resource. In other words, someone who is competent enough to be able to answer calls and deal with incidents. And we are at this period in what I would describe as our lowest ebb of deployable resources. Fortunately, the future is brighter. The future from here on in is that the people we recruited at the start of the year will be available for deployment from now and from the weeks ahead. And that will continue to grow over the next 3 years, where if we receive our full allocation, and we will keep pressing to ensure we do, the force establishment will rise by some 170 plus officers, which means that the Boston area will see its resources rise accordingly. That will give us the ability to be more flexible in how we respond and to be able to give the kind of service that we as a police want to do and that you as a local council.
You've gone out of sound, Chief Constable.
Want to see us deliver. So I hope, Chair, that Chris is the division. All right, okay. I was just concluding there. Can you hear me now?
I can now, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just concluding. I really hope that the presence of myself and the Commissioner and the support that we can give to the Divisional Commander and indeed Chief Inspector Trafford to see that we do the best possible service we can going forward, learning from the incidents of the 31st of July through to the 5th, 6th of August. But thank you very much for the invite. And if there's questions people have for me, I shall do my best to answer them during the course of this meeting.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I mean, we're
Thank
all
you, Chair.
really singing from the same hymn sheet. We're all really looking to how to improve and learn from what's happened in the past. So I thank you for that. Anyone else commenting on those? No. I will then move to Councillor Brian Rush then, please. I have some more questions, but I will ask them after. So, Councillor Rush, would you like to put your question? You raised your hand, Councillor Woodley.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can see. Can I just hold you there? Councillor Woodliffe, are you wanting to ask a question on the previous issue, or is that a hand for your question?
Yes, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Chief Constable 2 questions, actually, if that's all right.
I think I'm.
Well, I'm just going to say, can you wait until Councillor Rush is finished? You can ask them
Perfectly happy to wait. Perfectly happy to wait, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Rush, if you would like.
Mr. Chairman, I do apologise to Councillor Woodliffe, but I have written the question in a couple of weeks back.
No, it's all right. I don't have a problem with that. I just saw his hand appear, and I didn't know what it was.
I was just reassuring him that I wasn't jumping the queue.
Oh no, you wasn't jumping the queue, no.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. And can I just, at this point, before I ask the question, can I just reserve my right to speak again later on, please?
You may.
Thank you. Okay, and it is to the attending police constables and that. To say I was disappointed with the level of protection offered to the duty council officer, Mr. Ian Dunn, when he sought the assistance and ultimately the protection of the police would be an understatement. Can any of the Lincolnshire police representatives in attendance explain to the people of Boston why it seems the members of the travelling community are seem not to be subjected to the same legal responses from Lincolnshire Police as the public? Were they breaching trespass laws when it comes to bringing vehicles onto what is, after all, a pedestrian area? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. It looks like you're back on, Chief Superintendent Davison.
Yep. Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Rush. So, in short order, members of the travelling community are subject to the same legal response as other members of the community. And in terms of trespass laws, I'll come on to that shortly. So, the NPCC guidance on travelling encampments says use of police powers is a question of available police resources, and there may be times when an encampment will remain until suitable resources are available or other remedies are exhausted. We've already explained that legal proceedings were in process and therefore not felt at that time that the tipping point for section use of 61 powers at that point was met. Trespass is in the main a civil matter and pursuable through civil courts. And the report which Andy Goldsborough completed for you was very useful in that regard. There is no legal right to trespass. However, trespass is a civil rather than criminal offence. The coordinated use of police powers available under the CGPOA Act 94 allows for a proportionate response to encampments based on the behaviour of the trespassers. Decisions to evict or not must, of course, be balanced and be compliant with the terms of the Human Rights Act 1998, demonstrating legality, necessity, proportionality, as well as principles of common humanity. That's from the National Police Chiefs Council document 2018. That's why we have a joint protocol between ourselves and several other partners, and it would be useful to have the same agreed with Boston Borough Council. In terms of more detailed legal information, there is a really useful document called Dealing with Illegal and Unauthorised Encampments, published by the Department for Communities and Local Government in 2015, and that is available on the gov.uk website.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, may I ask another question following up to that, Mr. Chairman.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, for that overview. Would you mind explaining to me in some detail, really, about the protocol that it seems Boston has not signed up to, and let me know how many other local areas have signed up to it. I'm fascinated to know what it is that we're resisting, really. Would you mind elaborating, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure how much detail I can go into for you, because it is, as you might expect, as a protocol, so many pages long. It was constructed in 2018, and I know that was born out of an issue related to a travel encampment, from memory, I think, in Lincoln. I'm afraid I can't tell you the history of why or why not certain district councils have or haven't signed. At the time, from memory, I think I was the Detective Chief Superintendent in charge of crime, so it wasn't something which came across my desk. I do think it would be useful for me to send this committee a copy of that protocol, and I am more than happy to do so if that assists.
Yeah, that would be fine. Thank you, Chief Superintendent Davidson. I think that would be very good. That answers your question, Councillor.
Well, it does. In fact, it's quite surprising, really. Maybe it's me not having my finger on the pulse of the council, but you know, I was one of the ones criticising the sort of and in fact, in my question, you will see, Mr. Chairman, that I was critical of the police response. However, it seems to me that again, Boston is behind the curve, if you like, when it comes to there are things available to us. And in fact, you will see that we have done now quite extensive protections on that park, which is something that we've spent a lot of money on. But we're behind the curve every time, and this is ridiculous because our residents were absolutely terrified across those 3 days.
If I may, Councillor Goodale, just to reassure Councillor Rush around Boston Borough Council, it is only fair of me to say that I do know that officers from Boston Borough Council are very active in refreshing the protocol. So the last protocol was written and in place in 2018. And it's actually some of your very own officers who I know have been really active in getting a refreshed version in place. So it only seems fair to me to thank some of your officers, because I know they are very active in this space.
Well, I thank you for that. I thank you for the explanation, and I'm comforted by your words. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Oh, sorry, Chief Superintendent.
Mr. Spine, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't see any hands. So did you want to comment on that, Mr. Allen or Mr. Perry, as to why we're not part of this protocol? It seems we chose not to rather than be behind. Is there any reason why? Do you wish to comment, or shall I just move to the rest of the questions?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Sorry, I'm having a few technical problems to get my camera up, but yeah, I'm happy to tell you at least what I know in terms of the protocol. I understand that the protocol was put to the council back in 2018, as Chris Davison has mentioned, and I believe, so I'm told, at that particular time it was at the point where we were applying to the High Courts for the injunction, which was subsequently granted, and at the time the protocol was deemed to be incompatible with the injunction that was being sought at the time and was ultimately granted. And that's the reason, as it has been explained to me, as to why the protocol wasn't signed at that time. Clearly, that was then 2018, and times have changed since then. Not least of which our injunction has now been rescinded because it's been deemed no longer valid for a number of reasons, but which I won't go into now tonight. No. But I'm more than happy to look at the protocol and to reconsider our position after the meeting this evening, and to take a sounding from members of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Right, Councillor Woodliff, Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll put my picture up. That's all right. Now you can see me.
Fine, thank you.
Better. Yeah.
I can see you. Yes.
I'd like to ask the Chief Constable a couple of questions, if that's right, before I ask the one I'd posted around to people. That was really, Chief Constable, first of all, thank you very much indeed for your correspondence over the last few months. We have corresponded a few times, and I want to thank you very much indeed for your replies. I did have a question. The first one is actually, how many special constables do we have in Lincolnshire? How many special constables would be available to you at any one time? And the other thing is, you mentioned that the uplift was 170 officers. Now, what's that 170 from? Is that from the 1030 that I think we currently have, or is it from the 1100, which we're supposed to have? So it's two questions to start off with, Chief Constable.
Okay, thank you very much. How's the sound quality? Is it okay?
That's okay, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, you're welcome. So the first part, in terms of special constabulary, it varies, and it varies for two reasons. One is that the volunteering group that form the special constabulary, sometimes they are available and sometimes they are not. And what we try and do is refresh the numbers who are able to give the minimum number of hours. And if they're not able to do that, then unfortunately they have to move on and stop being a special constable, whilst we try and encourage them to pick their hours up and be part of the volunteering support to the organisation. And secondly, for a better reason, and that is that we often recruit from the special constabulary into the regular force when we're recruiting. And as you've heard me describe, since the start of this year, and indeed the very end of last year, we have been recruiting. Recruiting more so than I think we have ever done. I'm not quite sure if you go back through the record books or the history books when we last were pressing quite so hard on the recruitment. So it is certainly a period of kind of growth for that. In terms of numbers, they fluctuate. I mean, Chris might be able to say what it is actually currently on the east of the county. But we tend to have somewhere around 200, 250 who are active to one degree or another. And of those, there's probably a core of about 150, 160 who form the real kind of backbone of the special constabulary. We often go out to recruit. In fact, my very last official act, well, I'm saying official act, certainly my last attestation is in 2 Sundays' time, when I go to the attestation of the most recent group of special constables who are undergoing training as we speak. So it's certainly a very active area for us, and one that we've been trying to kind of support. And indeed, I don't know whether the Commissioner wants to come in after me, but the Commissioner has been trying hard to work with the local authorities to promote the volunteering route through the special constabulary. They are a much needed addition to the resources available to me as Chief Constable. In terms of the second question around the baseline of the recruiting numbers and the increase, essentially we arrive at the number of 170 because the national uplift of 20,000, government have decided that to distribute that on what's called the grant share. So essentially the government, central government grant is allocated according to a funding formula, one which we disagree with, I'd have to say, but nevertheless, that is the one that they're using. And they decided to use the same formula for the distribution of the police officer headcount uplift. That roughly is 0.85% of the national total, and 0.85 of 20,000 is 170. We've been reassured a number of times that that is the number we'll receive. And the only difference might be that there are discussions around ring fencing some of that number, only 4 for us, I'd have to say, but roughly that number to go into the serious and organised crime area of our business. That's not a loss. That's just ensuring that that area receives a suitable boost to deal with serious and organised crime across the county and the region. The baseline that government are using is 1020. Well, in fact, it's 1025. That's after some discussion and negotiation with them. But effectively, it's more likely in terms of headcount that's around 1080. So we are of around 1250. That is our aspiration, and that would include, sometimes we've got part-time officers, so they're included in headcount opposed to full-time equivalent. So it's a bit difficult to be absolutely definitive about baseline, but if I can say to you that it's somewhere in the middle between what you said in terms of 1020 and 1100. It's near the sort of 1070, 1080 mark, and the outcome at the end of all of this, we hope to be round about.
Sorry, we missed that.
We lost that.
We've lost that. We've still lost it.
1250, which is the 170 on the 1080. I'll pause there, Chair, and hopefully, Councillor, that was if there's any follow-up you want, then ask. But I don't want to, if the Commissioner wants to come in.
Can't hear. Paul, can't hear him, Paul.
No, I know. I can't hear. We've lost you again, Chief Constable.
Oh dear, and I was doing so well. How are you? Let me put my video off. When did you?
We lost you.
When did you hear up to?
Well, when you were just talking about the uplift,
right.
We lost you.
Okay, let me just recap very briefly then. In terms of numbers, the uplift is 170 because that is our national grant share of 20,000. So our grant allocation is 0.85% of the national grant, and that is what government have used for the uplift. So 0.85 of 20,000 is 170. When you add that onto the baseline, what we've agreed with government that our original baseline that we're projecting was 1025. Actually, in reality, we're probably nearer to 1070, 1080, and we think with additional funding, we may be able to have a final out 1250. That is 1250 is certainly our aspiration. I would advise not getting too hung up on the baseline number because that has moved up and down as we've discussed with government. What was our projected full-time equivalent headcount as opposed to our actual headcount, which includes part-time officers. So that hopefully that explains the numbers.
Yes, thank you, Chief Constable.
And I was inviting, I don't know whether the PCC wants to say anything about specials at all.
Mr. Jones, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll not put my video on just to save the bandwidth, and hopefully that will mean that you'll be able to hear me okay. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you at the moment, yes, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I have put round a proposal with all of the councils in Lincolnshire to support the recruitment of specials, and it's not something I can go into detail on, but I'm working hard to actually bolster the numbers, because I am conscious that a lot of our special constables, it sometimes ends up being a try before they buy arrangement, where they will get the experience of being an officer, and then they will fall in love with it and end up wanting to join the regulars. And that obviously means we gain them as a regular, which is superb, but it does mean that we occasionally lose them from the ranks of specials. So we do need to increase the ranks of specials, and I would certainly urge all councils to help market and advertise the availability of that through their own websites as well, because obviously this adds to your own community safety. I think the other thing which is really important, building on Councillor Woodliffe's point, is it's not just about officer numbers. I'm certainly not saying it's not about officer numbers, of course it is, but actually we need the right amount of police staff as well, and other volunteers, not just specials. For example, we need analysts to be able to crunch the data and make sure that the police are in the right place at the right time. We need all manner of skill sets, whether it's around investigating crime, whether it's in serious and organised crime, lots of things, not just about those frontline officers that you will see in your community, as valuable as they are. So we're trying really hard to sort of make sure we've got the right skill set, the right mix, and equally that we're freeing up those officers' time. The investments we've made over the last 4 years have all been designed to free up officer time, make sure they can spend longer in communities, less time in offices filling in paperwork, and that their time is as productive as possible. And I think that has been a huge success. So as much as officer numbers are very valuable, it is very much beholden upon us to make sure we spend taxpayers' money wisely, keeping officers in the right place. And I think that has been a huge success. So where we might have started at 1,100 and we're now aspiring to 1,250, it's got to be recognised that if we'd continued to do exactly what was being done back in 2016, now that same amount of officers would be doing the same amount of work, where actually I would say they're doing significantly greater work and keeping us all safer, regardless of whether there's exactly the same number or not. So I think the force needs a huge amount of recognition for that. What we need to do as well, between people like myself, the council, county as well, and our MPs, is work to make sure we're shaping future legislation to support our communities. And obviously one of the areas around this is that there is proposed legislation around illegal encampments, and I'm sure your very own MP will be keen to take an interest in that. But there are several bits of legislation which our MPs have helped shape, which have improved our safety, things like the domestic abuse bill and other areas, where we genuinely are working really, really hard to try and shape how our community is kept safe. So I think there's a lot of space for us to do more, but I think we do need to recognise that as partners in Lincolnshire, there's an awful lot of good practice that goes on, and we're starting from a very positive space. That's all I'd like to say, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. May I go on to the main question which I asked, if that's okay with you? Well, I did circulate one question to everybody, including, I think, all the guests, because I think the issue here goes far deeper than just an encampment. And if I pick out the last letter I received from the Chief Constable, if you allow me to quote it, so the first line says, "The issue of unauthorized encampments is one which is of concern for police forces across the country." Absolutely right, it is. And I think perhaps maybe people did see the Channel 4 Dispatches program run in April. Highly controversial program, and probably somewhat biased. But nevertheless, on that particular program, there was a spokesman for the traveller community, I think Paddy Doherty, who made some very important points. And very important points linked to education, the lack of educational opportunities for travellers' children. They are in fact disadvantaged in education, in health, and opportunities. And I think this links into some of the things that have been going on here, because the question I posed, I won't read it all out because it's quite a long point, but it basically asks what actions have been taken by the various agencies under the Children's Act and accompanying revision to the legislation to ensure that parents and guardians of these children adhere to the provision of the Act. Because it's one thing to prosecute people for offences, but you really need to get to the nub of the problem. And I don't think that the government or the other authorities are actually getting to the nub of the problem. We're dealing with, we could call it the symptoms, if you like, the issues around the edge. Now, obviously, if I look at the reports applied to us, the illegal encampment, I see that the petrol station, I see travellers being verbally abusive, which is 8 or 9 children, and trying to steal stuff from the store and so on. These are very, very important and serious issues for us in this town and the area. But there's a much wider picture here. Why is it going on? See, why is it going? What role are the parents taking in this? You see, and this comes into the issue of the Children's Act of 2004, and it comes into the legislation that has added further clauses to it. You know, one of the working together upgrade. It's on the question. You know, it says taking action to enable all children to have the best outcomes. Well, clearly that's not happening here. There's something going wrong at government level and at local authority level and in the police level, because of course, according to the Act, the safeguarding partners are, well, it's the CCGs, that's the health side of things, the Chief Constable, and Lincolnshire County Council, arguably, really. Boston Borough Council doesn't really have a line on that, but it does have some lines. Essentially, they're the three authorities. Now, something needs to happen here because this is an ongoing problem across the country. And we need to get to the nub of it. And I think the nub refers to the children and the children's welfare. And it's a key area for me. I think this is where we need to really look at it. It's a national thing. It's something the Member of Parliament, Mr. Warman, needs to get to grip on, I think, and Parliament itself. So we're looking at why these things occur, why do these offences occur, and we're looking at the children's side of things. And I think this is the key area, the children's side of things. What are we doing to stop these things going forward? Because as the Channel 4 documentary pointed out, effectively, I'm sorry, I'm carrying on a bit. The Channel 4 documentary basically pointed out a lot of these children have no opportunities. And that's the reason why there's a disproportionate number of traveller children or traveller young males in prison. So there's a major problem here. And it's dumped on Boston today. We've had the Boston issue here, yeah. But it's there's a major issue here which is not being tackled by the authorities who should be tackling it. And government's one. And I'm afraid to say the police are one, and the educational authorities are one, and the health authorities are one. And as a senior officer of the council mentioned the other day, he said there's the issue of domestic abuse wrapped up with all this. So there's serious problems. So that's the question. What action has been taken under the Children's Act and the accompanying revision to the legislation to ensure that parents and guardians of these children adhere to the provisions of the Act? What are we doing to care for these children? That's really the thing, isn't it? That's a big question, isn't it? I offer it to people. I'm not asking for any major answers. That is the issue that's in my mind. What are we doing? What not doing? Over to you, Chairman.
Very big question.
Yeah, they are big questions, yes.
I've got Chief Inspector James Trafford as indicated. Did you wish to comment, Chris?
It's open to everybody.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to say, I don't think there's anybody here that don't share your concerns, particularly when it comes to safeguarding children. The difficulties we face and all our partner agencies face are really twofold. One is the cultural issue and trying to get parents on board when their own beliefs are different from ours. And the second one is the peripatetic nature of the traveller community, the fact that they don't remain in one location generally, and therefore being able to grip that as a problem in any one area for any particular length of time. So really, I'm just acknowledging your difficulties and sharing the concerns, but also presenting those two particular difficulties we have with that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, right, Chris. Yeah.
Sorry, I've not figured out how to do the electronic hands up. I'm having to do it physically. Apologies.
Oh, that's not a problem. I did see you.
Councillor Woodliff, I think, raises a really important point, and I am very grateful to him for raising the question. I think it'll be useful for the committee, and I promise not to go on for too long. I will talk about the general principles of safeguarding for us, and then perhaps it's another recommendation that I think that we can think about together about how we might consider safeguarding obligations collectively. So with regards to incidents that happen on and off site, police have a recording responsibility in relation to vulnerability at any incident in terms of submission of details in line with what's a national police product called the Police Protection Notice, or PPN. So we create a document that records concerns about adults or children and provides a record of it for the police. That product is shared via a safeguarding hub with either children's services, adult social care, or Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust for Mental Health Issues, who are the main partners. The police have a responsibility to follow local procedures which stem from national guidance, and the form we use is in accordance with police national guidance. So the precise details of each encampment incident will differ, and response and ability for officers to complete the guidance will therefore alter depending on what they're faced with. And I will come on to some of the specifics, Councillor Woodliff, for you in regards to this encampment shortly. So in regards to children, the concerns around neglect and abuse are raised through the PPN, and immediate safeguarding needs addressed by liaison with children's services or taking emergency action in the form of a PPO. So those powers officers can use in terms of protecting persons at harm are minimal in number, but have a significant impact. And generally, Section 46 of the Children's Act 89 is the PPO, or police protection order, which is the power to take a child into police protection for 72 hours. That's the main power where there's maltreatment or concerns for a child which place them at significant harm. And the term significant harm is one which Section 47 of the Children's Act 89 means that that threshold in itself is met. And then a strategy discussion between partners results and is arranged for the Police Safeguarding Hub. This leads to joint working in line with Working Together 2018 guidelines. And if there are no immediate concerns, then either Children's Services or the police can conduct early health assessments to make an assessment as to the need for a social worker or other involved worker. If there are concerns which require attention, then these can progress to an initial child protection conference, an initial child protection review where the immediate protection of the child from maltreatment is the priority, and then a focus on preventing future impairment to the health of the child or their development. So that's the theory. Actually, when it comes to practice, that can be really difficult. So in the cases which Councillor Woodliff speaks about, and he's very helpfully highlighted the instance that he's picked out from the report, one of the major issues there is we didn't identify who the children were. It's very difficult to run an assessment when we haven't identified who the children are. And that's the same, whether it be for a traveller child or a child from any of the settled communities in Boston. So this lends me to think, what could we collectively do differently? So I apologise again to members because you won't have seen the protocol. But one of the things the Protocol 18 between ourselves and some other partners talks about is a welfare needs assessment of people on the site. And we would always accompany people to conduct those to make sure that safety of everybody is maintained. That may be a way of addressing some of the concerns which Councillor Woodliff, I have to say, raises very well. For instance, not particularly applicable for the height of August, but education needs being met. The guidance, the police national guidance talks around, for adults, for instance, advanced stages of pregnancy or clear cases of neglect. What we've missed here, I think, collectively, ourselves as the police and you as a local authority, is that opportunity for us to show some professional curiosity at the ground level to see if there are any glaring and obvious concerns which we could act on. And that's why I think, should we have something like this in the future, that senior level meeting that would enable safeguarding to be part of a standing agenda would help make sure that we're all focused on this. Because there's no point me saying at the ground level, officers should have identified some blurry CCTV and found kids who may or may not actually have come from the site. That's not the opportunity, frankly, to do the safeguarding work in operation. That needs to be driven by senior officers, whether it's in the police or the local authority or health or education, coming together. And we had an opportunity collectively. We weren't able to grasp it this time. We must make sure we grasp it the next time. And I hope that provides at least a way forward for the future.
Thank you, because I think that does, yes. Thank you.
Chairman, do I come back on that?
If you wish to, Stephen, yes.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Chief Superintendent Davidson and also the Chief Constable for their contributions. I'm not out to pin anything on them. What I'm trying to do is to point out that we need to really, as a nation, to grasp this issue, because as the Chief Constable points out in his letter, this issue affects police forces right across the country. It's affecting everybody. There's a really serious issue here that Parliament has got to get to grips with, and that's why I hope Matt Wallman's listening in. I mean, I pick up on the point. Was it by Andrew Sellis, a member of Parliament for Bedfordshire, I think it is, who had raised this issue in 2018? I'm very conscious of the fact that Parliament has a role here which it isn't doing. because of all the other trivial things that are going on, Brexit and whatever, it seems to have got sidetracked from the really important issues, which is actually to look after the welfare of everybody in the country. And that does include the travelling community. So it's something that's needed across the country. It's something, it's not about just talking to local police chiefs and so on, which are doing a brilliant job. It's a national issue. This one is a critical issue. You've got an isolated community, because that's what is going on here. You have an isolated community, the traveller community, and then you've got the much larger public community, if you like. You've got an isolated community here, and it's not interacting well with the national community for a lot of reasons. And education is one of the principal ones, because I understand that the vast majority of traveller children do not attend secondary education. So their educational opportunities are limited. So therefore their life chances are limited. And this is part of the problem. That's part of the problem. That's why I think a lot of this is going on. This is why we have this issue, on the encampment. It's a symptom of it. I've gone on too long. I do apologise. I want to thank all the people who've come tonight. I do thank them very much for their contributions. I'm very appreciative of what's been said. But there's a key issue here. I haven't heard from Matt Warman yet.
Well, no, Matt's got his hand up. I was just going to bring him in.
Right,
Stephen.
About time he came in, because it's really aimed to him, actually.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Councillor Goodale. Look, Stephen raises a completely valid point. These are amongst the very hardest people to help, because primarily because even if you can persuade members of the travelling community to accept help when it is offered, they are very often only in an area for a matter of days. Now, how do you practically get someone to attend a series of secondary schools over the course of a term, never mind over the course of a year? So Parliament has tried successive measures, all of which have tried to pay special attention to the travelling community. And as Stephen quite rightly points out, none have really cracked this problem. It doesn't help when travelling communities arrive in a certain area. They are very often the pressure from local communities and local councils is, how do you move these people on as quickly as possible? And I have a lot of sympathy when there is a huge amount of crime often associated with them, as we've seen in this instance that we're talking about. But it means that you've got two sort of very contradictory pressures. You've got how do you move people on versus how do you try and get people to stick around long enough to engage with the system, especially when there is very often not a huge amount of encouragement to engage with that system. Sort of what's in it for me and my kids is sort of the first question that is often asked by people when social services try to engage. So I'm not suggesting that there are easy answers here by any means, but the only thing I would say is that every time these matters come up in Parliament, it's not just Andrew Selous raising them, it's something where there's interest across the whole House. You then come to a sort of obvious argument, which is to what extent can you force parents to send their children to school in the way that we fine parents for not sending their children to school in up and down the country, when we also say that we will respect the itinerant nature of those families, and squaring that circle is immensely difficult. I hate to say it though, this is not when I went to visit the park before the travellers had moved on. There was not a single local resident who raised the issues that Stephen has raised. So, and I don't suggest that is anything other than a sort of logical human reaction. But there are a huge number of conflicting needs and emotions around this sort of stuff, and trying to square that circle is immensely difficult. It will continue to be a government priority, but it remains the fact on ultimately the thing the government is consulting on changing at the moment is making it easier to move on traveller encampments when they arrive. That in turn, to some extent, makes it harder to engage with the communities when we all think, I suspect, that their children getting a better education might lead to better behaviour than that we saw in Boston, particularly in this recent instance.
Thank you, Matt.
Can I come back on that, or am
Well,
I?
you can, Stephen. I don't want this to become the Stephen and Matt show.
Yes, I understand that, but sorry.
Yes.
Oh, I'm back in. I understand that my views will probably well, not the same as the people who are close to the park. And I will understand that, but the point is that the issue I'm raising is to try and deal with that very issue, so that we don't have the type of thing we have had experience on Woodfield Park. It is to try and stop, and elsewhere, because if you move people on, somebody else has a problem, and somebody else has a problem. So we try and deal with the issue at the heart of the issue. That's what government's not doing.
Yes, I think we all understand the point you were making.
Sorry?
I think we all understand the point you were making.
Good. At least we understand it, because I don't think Parliament's got the message. It's got to sort this out. That's why we elect members of Parliament, to sort these very difficult problems out. Anyway, I won't say any more, Paul.
Okay,
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. I'll now be quiet.
I mean, they are very difficult problems, and I will bring Matt back in later. Right, Councillor Danny, you've been waiting patiently for a while. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have to put my video probably because you blocked it.
Have I?
I think my camera, probably you blocked it, so I cannot use it.
I haven't, no.
Okay, we do that.
It is.
That's it. Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Chris. I think, if I may call him Chris, the Chief Superintendent, Chris Davidson. I have a question for him. But before that, I just want to talk about the well-being of the children, and especially the travelers' children and their families. I mean, it is hard to talk about kids not attending schools, which is difficult, as I have kids on my own. So we would love to see these kids in schools. The only thing is, how can it be achieved if the parents are always on the move? This is the big question. And from here, I'm going to talk about my experience when I used to be a taxi driver. I used to have a school run where I should collect a student from Grantham, from a traveler's family, to bring to Boston to do their education in Boston. The school run used to cost £60 for that person a day. When I was calculating it, it comes almost to £10,000 a year. Now the money is there for them to go to schools. And bear in mind, I'm not defending the government here or anybody else. I'm talking from my experience to share with you, Mr. Woodliffe, Councillor Woodliffe. And I think 3 to 4 times a week, when I go to collect these people to come to school, they don't show off. They don't even call that they're not going to school. So I always go and wait for 15 to 20 minutes. Nobody show up, and I go back. And I used to question myself, how much money we waste. And these kids, they don't want to go to school themselves. So the question here, there is money from the government on their school runs, and they're not using it. But the money is paid to the taxi firms. That's one thing, just to share with you. My question to Chief Superintendent Chris is that it comes to my attention from the members of the public that some of these caravans who were on Woodville Park didn't have insurances, no MOTs, and no road tax. Now, bear in mind, these people, they are carrying their families, and again, the well-being of children. They have children and babies in these caravans. And if they don't have any insurances, I mean, God forgive, if an accident occurs, basically there will be some damages. If they don't hurt themselves, basically they will hurt other members of the public. Is there any law or anything, which is, we know what's the law. If you have no insurances, if I don't have my insurances, my MOT, I think my car will be confiscated. It will be taken by the police. Why not applying the same rules on the travelers? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, if you'd like to respond to that, please.
So at the risk of sounding slightly flippant, the same rules apply to everybody.
Thank you, Chris. I thought you would say that. But no, that's true. I agree.
So was it true? Was that the case that some of the caravans didn't have insurances and MOTs and road tax? Because as far as I'm concerned, some of them, they come from Ireland. So they may not have a European insurance to cover them.
I can't answer as to every vehicle's insurance, councillor. I don't have the details in front of me. If we had them on a road and they had no valid insurance, they would be subject to the same enforcement as anybody else.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Councillor Rush, you indicated to come back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I might be getting the hang of this thing now.
Good.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Ah, brilliant. We're cracked it. Okay. I've listened intently to what the police have said, and I thank them for the clarity that they've presented to us. And it seems as though we may actually be victims of our own intransigence, if that's the right terminology, because I wasn't aware that there was these protocols that Boston seems to have chosen to ignore. So I would like to ask for a bit more. I would like to ask for a bit. Now someone's asking me to look at my video, so I'm sure it's just a member of the fan club. Don't worry. So I would like to ask Christian Allen really to explain to me. Okay, so we accept that you haven't joined this protocol, but you have never mentioned this, as far as I am aware, anyway, about this kind of facility being available. And frankly, I think that's a bit of a downer on the police to a degree, because everyone understands that the police resources are pretty well stretched most of the time, besides the fact that they're talking about better resources coming. But realistically, we failed here, didn't we? We failed to have anyone noticing, if you like, that those same travellers, I believe, left Skegness on that day and were on the move. So I would think that the officers, if you like, of Skegness would have known that they had experienced a problem during the course of the time that those travellers had stayed there. And surely the grapevine, if nothing else, would have informed Boston, which is probably half an hour away by caravan, something like that, of the caravan, so to speak. So I would like Christian Allen to actually tell me now, with the benefit of hindsight, why all of this chain reaction continued.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if you can answer that, Christian, but
I'm happy to respond, but I think I sort of covered my response earlier. With the opportunity to sign the 2018 joint protocol was put forward to the council back in 2018. The decision was taken then not to sign it because it was incompatible with the High Court injunction that had been granted at that time. But as I said in my previous answer, it's a very different place now, and the injunction is now no longer valid. It's been rescinded. So it would be a good, it'd show good leadership from Btac if they were to ask officers to reconsider the position on the protocol, and I'm very happy to take that away as a recommendation.
thank you, Christian. I think we will be making that recommendation. Yes, Councillor Rush.
I'm very pleased to hear that, actually, Mr. Chairman. And in fact, I'm very disappointed that we hadn't sort of raised the issue before. Now, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that Boston has now spent on fencing off the Woodville Road, that makes a dramatic difference to the incursions that we experienced then. So, you know, this is a children's play area. So from the police point of view as well, those barriers ought to have been in place long before, even as a matter of safety for children in a play area. And I may be asking to spend far too much public money, but I think that every play area should be like that. And I would ask the powers that be really whether anyone invading the space of Woodville Road now and interfering with that barrier, would that be termed as a criminal act of breaking an entry?
Thank you, Brian. I don't know. I'm sure the police will, a member of the police present will actually let us know. Would that be constitute a criminal offence, Chris? Do you know? Is it criminal damage?
Yeah,
or?
so, yeah, committing damage would be criminal damage. So it's one of the kind of bread and butter offences that the police deal with every day. And in fact, during that period we talked about, there were several criminal damages in and around Boston. What it is it's being damaged is broadly immaterial. So yes, it would be criminal damage offence.
Thank you for that, Chief Inspector.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. Thank you, Chris. Councillor Evans. Deborah.
Thank you. I'm just trying to. The host has stopped my video, it says.
Well, I can see it's up, but I haven't stopped it. I am a co-host, but I will click on it for you. But I don't know if that's any different.
That's lovely. Let me just start my video. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of points really. I have to say I think the fence is excellent. It's a really good safety feature as well. So I've not heard anybody say that they haven't thought the fence was good. So that's a positive. I think we've got to be careful here because I've heard a lot tonight about matching travelling communities to what we see as life chances. And our life chances, or how I might see life chances, is completely different culturally with different cultures. So I've worked with teachers who actually go to traveller sites and work with children and teach in the community. So there is a lot of really good things going on out there. But there is different cultural goals. So our idea of a goal, going to secondary school, getting certain awards, certain exams, isn't always the same. And who's to say which is the best system? So it's not a one size fits all. So our secondary school system does not fit at the moment. And when I visited the site with Matt and I spoke to a gentleman called John, he quite happily, really happily told us that they've got 50 different registration plates. He pointed to his registration plate and said, have you seen that? I've got another 50 of those. So, and I felt they had complete confidence that he could do whatever he wanted. And either through fear, because at first he tried to sort of intimidate, and then when he realised that we were quite friendly, he took the opportunity to speak, and we spoke with this gentleman for quite a while. And I really did feel that the locals that we spoke to were living in fear, and the travellers that were on that site, or the ones I spoke to, were living in complete confidence that nobody was going to come and take their illegal things or stop them taking the fuel or whatever they were doing. So I feel that they do have a confidence that and criminal. If I was to do a criminal act, I wouldn't have the confidence. I don't do a criminal act because I don't want to go to prison, and I also felt he made a valid point, and this isn't my speciality, so I don't want to make out it is, but he made a point that there was nowhere for them to stop. So they need somewhere to stop. We spoke about the other sites that were nearby or nearest, and he explained that it's almost tribal. So if your name was one name, you could go on that site. But if your name was a different family name, you would avoid that site because it would there would be trouble, there would be fights, there would be arguments. So although it looks in theory that people can go to a site to rest or to stay for a while, you can't if your name doesn't fit. So I thought that was a very interesting point. So I thought we need to at least have somewhere that they can stop off that's neutral, that's not some communities haven't already taken over or use as their stop. And also, we've got to be aware of the absolute fear that some people felt during that time. So looking at it from both sides really, and not trying to pigeonhole the travelling community into what we think is that, and actually I think some of their opportunities, they have an opportunity to be together with family a lot more during the day. Some of the wives and daughters have opportunities to have children and to bring them up without having to go to leave them at home. So I do think different people will have different ideas of what your life goal is. So I do think we need to be careful when we try and maneuver a culture into what we think, because we may look back in years to come and think actually some of their ideas were forward thinking. But I'll leave it at that, and just to say thank you for the work that you do, but I do want to feel safe, because I couldn't take my dog out because there was a van believed to be off there that was near my house, and I got stopped on a lane, and I do want to think that things like that would be dealt with immediately instead of just waiting for them to go. And that's it really. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David. Chris, is there anything you'd like to pick up on that?
Just a couple of points, if I may. So I'm grateful for the council for observations. And again, some of this may sound slightly flippant, and I don't mean it to. But in the distant past, I seized a car off somebody from who wasn't a traveller, and that person told me it didn't matter because he'd got another 4 cars, it'd all be fine. I subsequently saw him for days on end without a car. I have to say that there is an element of bravado from some of the criminal fraternity, whether you're from a settled community or from a traveller community. And whether or not there were 50 registration plates readily available, who knows? In terms of, I think you're very fair and open-handed in your comments there. One of the incidents that I looked at, you talk about community fear, and of course, I'm a resident of Boston and South Holland. I want to feel safe, and I need my family to feel safe, exactly the same as yours. But one of the incidents we were called in as public order regarding one of the travellers at a petrol station. But when we investigated, the traveller had tried to pay for fuel and been told that they wouldn't serve him because he was a traveller, despite the fact that he'd got cash, despite the fact that he hadn't actually done anything wrong up to that point, except for be seen as a traveller. I think it's really important that, and I think you make this point really well, Councillor, that we don't just see all travellers as being travellers and being trouble like everybody else. Everybody is an individual. The vast majority of people just want to live their lives in a way that doesn't disturb other people, and it's a shame, as it is for people who live off certain estates or from certain sections of the community, the whole communities get blamed for the actions of a few. It's a recurring theme that's gone on today in today's discussion, and some of the questions that were put to us earlier around why is there one rule for one set of people and one rule for another. When it comes to breaking the law that we can prove and the level of investigation we do, I can assure you there is no difference whatsoever. It's really important to me as a matter of principle that we apply the law fairly and equitably towards everybody. And that includes if you're a suspect for a crime or a victim of crime. And of course, anybody from any community can fall into either of or both of those camps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reply. That was a good reply. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Councillor Dorian, Anne, please. You're on mute, Anne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to say a very big thank you to all our guests here tonight, and I really appreciate the fact that you've given up your time. So to Matt Warman, Mark Jones, Chief Inspector Superintendent Davison, the Chief Constable, and I think I've missed out one, Chief Inspector Trafford. Thank you all very much. I very much appreciate your attendance this evening. I want to start by saying that I think we have to acknowledge and publicise really the horrific experience that our residents had during this encroachment. The fear that they suffered was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And I know that there were many elderly people and middle-aged people who really had difficulty sleeping during this incident. And I think we need to sort of recognise that and not lose sight of that. This is a complex issue, so complex that we won't even scratch the surface tonight. But it is right that we try. It's right that we try and move the needle, even if it's only a little bit. And that being said, I am concerned about the amount of crime during this period of time. And I did want to follow up with what Chris just said when he talked about the fuel. I wanted to ask about any criminal activity that took place, even though the travellers move on somewhat and disperse as a group or continue on in the same group. For the crimes that took place in Boston, do you follow that up? Do you hand that off to another force? Do you hand it off to the CPS? Wherever you get identification details, are there prosecutions that take place? And I'm interested about the fuel, Chris, particularly, because that's something I made a note of, that they drove off without paying for fuel. Now I'm hearing you say something quite different, that they wanted to pay for fuel, but were denied. So would you speak to that, please, and just clarify? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I may just come to some points in order, and I promise I will come to your question, substantive question. So I think the first point you raised around community fear around the encampment is really well made. You know, that was why we visited on that site on at least 3 occasions every shift, and often much more. I think it's incumbent on all of us. It doesn't matter really which public authority you work for, whether you're the police or the health service or local authority, actually, that we just make sure that our language is temperate and doesn't unnecessarily cause fear. And that is not to say that there weren't issues. Actually, there were 14 recorded crimes from the 37 incidents that were raised with us, which purported to be around travellers. And I use that word advisedly, because I am long enough in the tooth to know that it doesn't take very much for a rumour to become a fact, to become a terror. So we are, as an organisation which is evidence-led, very careful around the terminology we use when it comes to suspects and who are suspects. That being said, there was clearly criminality which was coming from that site. Let me be unequivocal on that. The main issue that we had through those reports was actually one of identification. So on some occasions, particularly when it came to thefts, it was very difficult to identify who the offenders were. That was always an issue. Each and every crime that was recorded is subject to the very same procedures. It doesn't matter where it's built forth from, whether it's a traveller encampment or your street or wherever it is. The same principles of the police service are the same. So some of the nuts and bolts mechanics you were asking about, yes. So for instance, if we have CCTV footage and it's not possible for us to be able to make an identification, if it's of sufficient quality and the crime is serious enough, then that gets broadcast across all police forces. If there's a line of inquiry that we can follow up with, for instance, if we do find who a person is and we're not able to talk to because they've moved, they're notified as wanted on the police national computer. What that means is if we get a bead on where they may be from whatever community, they're liable to arrest if they're checked by an officer and the details are checked, because it will flag up on the system that they're wanted by another force, and then they'll be arrested, and then wherever they are, either we go and interview them there or we bring them back to Lincolnshire, which is obviously very inconvenient for the suspect, but that's often what we do. And in terms of kind of thresholds for going to the Crown Prosecution Service where that's required for prosecution, those are universal. And when it comes to inspections, so you'll know that the police service is fairly heavily regulated and audited, as it should be, as a coercive arm of the state. We are, very heavily audited by HMIC FRS, the inspection body. They do crime data integrity checks to make sure that we crime everything that we should crime. They check on our investigations and the quality of those investigations, and they check on our rates of prosecution. So I know that's a slightly technical explanation, and I'm really happy to discuss in all the forums if it helps explain. But yes, every single crime that's reported goes through the same process, irrespective of where that crime comes from.
And would you speak to the fuel incident at the Applegreen station?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. So it's really important that we don't conflate incidents. Mm-hmm. So the incident I'm talking about was actually reported as a public order incident. So that isn't the same as the offence where somebody was alleged to have driven off without paying. So a different incident.
Okay. So no, we might want to continue this conversation at another Btac meeting, but a couple of things sprung to mind when you spoke there, Chris. One is, I inferred from what you just said is that this purported crime from the travelling community suggests that perhaps other people might take advantage of the fact that there's been an incursion, and that members of the public who aren't part of that travelling community, they may commit crime and want it to be linked back to the travelling community. But did I infer that wrong?
There's all sorts of different possibilities. So the first is that somebody reported as a suspect for an offence. Often when we get the calls, it's a traveller from the encampment. Well, there are a couple of issues with that. Firstly, was it a traveller? Secondly, if it was a traveller, was it from that encampment? While we had that encampment during that period, they aren't the only travelling communities in Boston at that time. There are plenty of settled people who are travellers from travelling communities. So we have to be very careful, I think, that we don't just accept on face value that they're all going to be from this community. Of course, we suspect it, and we go from what people tell us, but we work on evidence as a police service. So we always try and keep an open mind as we investigate.
Okay. So before
I hope that explains the answer.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. Yeah. Before I let go of this issue linking it to do with crime, it seems to me that any crime I read about that's linked to the travelling community is always very serious. That that when it's in the paper, it's generally the broadsheets, it's national, and it's very serious crime. So, do you have any data of what might be a lower level type of crime, like stealing fuel, stealing from shops, criminal damage? Do you have data that would indicate the success of any prosecutions against this community in Lincolnshire?
We don't prosecute communities, we prosecute individuals.
No, I know, that would indicate the success of any prosecutions of individuals who hail from that community.
Where they have indicated an ethnicity, yes, but bear in mind that recording of ethnicity is also voluntary. Sure. So, I mean, I'm guessing that probably there is very scant data regarding the success of any criminal prosecution. I wouldn't want to mislead you, Councillor, because I don't have the data in front of me.
Okay, but well, is that something you could look at for us, Chris, and let us have it if it's in your possession and if it is a bit readily available? I don't want to send you on a goose chase. I really don't. I'm just curious to know if it exists.
I'm happy to talk probably outside the meeting. Whether or not the amount of effort it would take to analyse and get that would overweigh some of the other work we have analysts doing, I'm not quite sure it made out, but really happy to talk to you outside the meeting.
No. Okay, thank you for that. Now, I want to move to the other side of the argument now, which is in acknowledging the pain and suffering and the fear that the residents endured, that the point that Councillor Woodliff made was an excellent point, and I wholeheartedly endorse what he said. I'm particularly interested in education, and we actually, in Lincolnshire, it's the county council who are responsible for children's education, and we do have an Mtac team, the Ethnic Minority and Travellers Education team. And so these people put together packs for children. I'm particularly interested in that primary school children don't slip through the net. And so what I'm curious to know, albeit that this happened in the school holidays, and I get that, so that, you know, for our purposes, this wouldn't have perhaps occurred. But within your protocol that you have with other authorities, is part of that protocol that you alert the Mtac team or the any sort of health visitors or anything like that when you encounter children?
Apologies, as I generally talk to the kind of enforcement of law and prevention of crime and disorder, I'm probably not well equipped enough to give you the answer which you deserve. As I said earlier, I'm really happy to send over the existing protocol. And as I've said, kind of members, not members, officers from Boston Borough Council have been working on the refresh. So I would suggest it's probably worth touching base with them to ensure that if it isn't currently, and I will make sure that Btac gets a copy of the 2018 protocol, that it's worked into that in the future.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a copy, but thank you very much for offering it, and I appreciate your answers tonight, Chris. Thank you very much. So I'd like to speak to you now, Mr. Chairman, in closing my remarks, and that is to say that there are a couple of issues I think we do need to follow up on the protocol. And make sure that some sort of liaison is done with the Mtac team and perhaps the health services as well, whenever the travellers visit our shores. I'd also like us to move the needle a little bit on finding a suitable place for them to camp up, so that they don't get involved in criminal damage or destroying children's play areas. And of course, that would be a huge piece of work, but we have to start somewhere. And lastly, I'd be really keen to see any data that Chris could perhaps provide around the success of any prosecutions linked to individuals who have turned up in a community like Boston for a short period of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Anne. Obviously, we will pursue this, whatever members of this committee want us to pursue as a Btac. I mean, I'm pretty much take on board. We will be actually looking at the multi-agency thing through Christian, and I'm sure we will move that forward at the end of this before we close the meeting. So. I'm quite happy to take those forward, Anne.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, it was remiss of me not to give Councillor Hasty's apologies. He lost connection, got back into the meeting a couple of times, but left, I think it was around 7:50.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for that.
You.
Yes, Christian.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Dorian. For those questions. In terms of, there's a couple of questions you raised in terms of transit sites for the traveller community. As I understand it, there are a couple of sites earmarked in Boston potentially as transit sites, but I'm not in a position to be able to tell committee tonight where we're at in terms of the planning for those sites and whether there is a distinct possibility they'll come to fruition or not. But I think that's something that we can go away and bring back to Btac to get a status report, if you like, or an update on where we're at with those particular transit sites and their planning consents. The second thing I wanted to come back to, and this has been mentioned a couple of times this evening by the Police and Crime Commissioner, Mark Jones, and also by our MP, Matt Warman, is the amendments to the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. This is one of the primary bits of legislation, if you like, that councils use to manage illegal traveller encampments. And the Home Secretary launched a public consultation on this particular act back at the beginning of this year. The consultation closed in March and subsequently hasn't moved much further in the parliamentary process for the obvious reasons of the pandemic. But the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act does talk about councils. One of the amendments suggested, rather, is that councils can use transit sites outside of their council borders. So that's not currently permissible under the current act. But one of the amendments suggested in the new act is that travellers can be asked to transit in a site that's not in the boundaries of the particular local authority that they're currently residing. There are quite a few other amendments to that act which would also help the police and the council in dealing with illegal traveller sites, but unfortunately it's paused in the parliamentary process at the moment. It might come as some comfort to members of committee that the leader of the council has written to the Right Honourable Priti Patel this week and asked her directly to inform him as to where the consultation is at and when the legislation changes that have been proposed are going to be enacted, and we await with interest a reply to that. But the issue around transit sites and the lack of transit sites in Boston is one of the reasons why the injunction that we were awarded by the High Courts back in March is now been rescinded, because subsequent case law and sympathy by the judiciary and pressure from the traveller community has determined that injunctions are no longer upheld where the council cannot demonstrate, or is not able to demonstrate, that there is a transit site to move the traveller community onto. So we're in a bit of a cleft stick, really. We don't have a transit site in Boston. That means our injunction is invalid, and at the moment we don't have the legislation to move travellers onto transit sites outside of our district. And until that's resolved and the Criminal Justice Public Order Act is amended, then we're not going to make much progress in that regard. So that's just a bit of a background, and it is relevant to the discussions this evening and the way that the encampment was dealt with over the summer. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, Christian, thank you. Can I ask you, Matt Warman, is that what Christian was talking about? Is that the report that was supposed to be issued late this autumn, that's been held up?
Well, the consultation closed, as Christian said, in March. To be honest, there isn't a sort of set pattern for how long these sorts of things take and when legislation might change. What we do know is that legislation won't change in this parliamentary session, not this parliament, this parliamentary session, and there'll be a new Queen's speech in relatively early in the new year, I would expect, but we haven't got a confirmed date for that. That would be the earliest point at which you would hope there would be a government announcement saying we will in the next few months be changing the law on this. To be honest, Obviously, that parliamentary session will also be chock-a-block with a whole load of post-EU stuff, and the sort of subsequent consequences of COVID, and a whole load of sort of business as usual, if I can call it that. I wouldn't say that we should necessarily be guaranteeing, thinking that it was guaranteed that it would be in that session, but that's when you should be starting to look out for things.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Alison, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, can I thank all the guests for the very helpful comments that they've made during the course of the evening. And I think a lot of this has been an eye-opener for many people present today. A lot of what I was going to comment on has actually just been covered by Christian, but I wished, rather than ask a question, I was going to encourage that probably yourself, Councillor, as chairman of this committee, but requested that the letter is written. But as a member, I've been a member for many years of the South East Lincolnshire Joint Local Plan, and one of the things that we have, one of the policies we have on that plan is about traveller sites. And I do recall that at the stage when we were writing that, we have a certain, I've got to be difficult because the sites and pictures, that there's very, very strange terminology. So I don't want to use the wrong one, but the point is, I think because we were doing a joint policy with South Holland District Council, it was thought that our sites, they had well, they've got a lot more area, haven't they, geographically, and a greater number of travellers always within South Holland. But the site that they can offer as a transit site was deemed at that stage acceptable for travellers passing through Boston Borough, because it doesn't take very many hours to drive from one border of the borough to the other, does it? But of course, what I am aware of is that we are going to be updating that joint local plan, and this is a very, very timely moment for that to be raised, because national policy changes all the time, so we have got to make those changes. I'm not sure whether that will now come under Mike Gildersleeve's, but I'm sure either Christian or Phil Perry will be able to put us straight on that. So I'll just end by saying thank you again to all of you present who have spoken this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alison. Brian, Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for letting me speak again. I listened intently to what was going on there, and frankly, you know, it seems as though Boston is again at fault for not sort of making sure that we have provisions. So our councillors really ought to be apologising to the people of Boston, because there's been a fair bit of sort of talk about these encampments and invasions and whatever, considering the fact that Woodville Road, I believe, had 4 times they have had this type of incursion. Yet Christian comes on and tells us that nothing has really been done. Now, I know we may be paying lip service to whatever the problems, the legal problems that he was involved in, and I hope he doesn't take this personally. I don't mean that to be a personal attack. What I am saying though is, we deserve all we get, don't we? We're not providing anything for the travelling community, and even the part that we do, we've now been told that there is a kind of a tribalism that stops it. So we really ought to get our act together and find some place for these people to settle or move into and move out of the transient community, because at the moment they're just practicing the rights that they have of travel, and we are standing there twiddling our thumbs and complaining. The people of this town deserve better than this from our councillors, And I'm really annoyed now at the end of this, informed but annoyed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. Thank you for that. I don't know if you want to come back, Christian, on that, but I mean, I would just like to really sum up. I can't see anybody else wishing to speak, but I'd just like to sum up the evening by thanking.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I just had one last question. Would you mind?
Sorry, Councillor Owen, I didn't see your hand, but okay.
It didn't go up. I was waiting. I thought other people might want to come in. It was just a last question for Christian on the issue of the travel encampment. I know you're going to bring it back to us, but whose decision will it be as to whether we get involved in that or not? And the second part to that was, whose decision was it not to join the protocol in 2018? Was that an officer decision or was that a councillor decision? And if so, which committee did it go to? I'll go and find the papers myself if it was a committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Christian, would you like to comment on that, answer that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I believe, Councillor Dorian, that it was an officer decision that was made not to sign the protocol back in 2018. I believe that was the position then. I will need to take a view from colleagues and members as to when we bring the protocol back, how that decision is made this time around. I think it would be prudent and sensible to involve members in that process. And I'm, whether what committee that is or what process, I'm not exactly sure at the moment, but we do certainly need to involve members in that decision. So I can assure you that we'll bring it back to members in some form or another.
Thank you, Christian.
And the encampment, Mr. Chairman, the second part of the question was the encampment. Whose responsibility will that be?
It's a planning decision, but I'm not sure. Again, I don't want to mislead members this evening, and I wouldn't want to say anything more at the moment as to where we're at with the particular encampments or the sites that have been identified for transit sites. So what I can assure you is that I can bring that information back to Btac as part of a further report or put that information in front of members in some other way. I'll take advice from you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Christian. I think we'll probably bring it back to this committee, but in a future report. But we will lump it all together with the multi-agency task. Councillor Danny, Mr. Mayor, you wish to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more as a comment. I will agree with Councillor Woodliff, as he said previously. This is a big issue. I mean, we don't have to look just on the encampment of travelers in a park. They can go anywhere on the highways. They can go between houses. They can, they can park their caravans on any free parking, and they can get away with it. The issue here, it's much bigger. It's bigger, and I think is down to the parliament and the government if they have to come with new legislations and what they can do. And as Councillor Rush said, they are free to do that. They just exercise their rights, which is, in fact, it's not their rights, but they are called the travelers and they can park anywhere. And that's, for me, how I see the issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Danny. Thank you. Right, just to sum up then, there aren't any more speakers, and I would like to really thank all of our guests this evening. I'd like to thank our MP, Mr. Matt Warman, and the Mark Jones, the Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner. I'd also like to thank Chief Superintendent Chris Davison, Chief Inspector James Trafford, and Chief Constable Bill Skelly for their attendance this evening. And thank you all. Thank you for your candid responses, and I do appreciate you giving up your time for us this evening. Judging by some of the comments made, we'll probably be asking you to come back and follow up with some of the other items which were raised. I would like to move it forward that we do actually ask our officers to bring back to this committee the a joint protocol of joint agreement. And I would like that to, I'd like Christian to bring that forward as soon as possible. And I think it might be, we might be asking you to come back to support that Chris, because obviously you have a bit of an insight into how it works. And of course, you're welcome anytime, Matt, to come to join Btac and give us any updates you can on this. And of course, you're always welcome to join our committee anytime you wish. So I thank you all. Right, Christian, can I ask you to actually liaise with Chris, although he's going to send it to Btac, but to bring this joint protocol to, well, it won't be the next Btac because that's in a couple of weeks. It'll be the one after that, one assumes, and to bring to us that, and we'll look at the issues which Councillor Dorian has raised as well, with the planning issues and the like. That's okay.
More than happy to do that. I wouldn't like to say at the moment that it would be the protocol would need to come back to Btac for agreement. I need to take some advice on through which governance process the sign-up arrangement to the protocol would need to go through. However, you can rest assured that I'll liaise directly with Chief Superintendent Chris Davison, and we'll take that forward.
Well, yeah, thank you. Well, I'm sure it'll be the cabinet that has to take the protocol agreement through, and it will probably go through scrutiny. But as I asked both of those to actually take this forward, and neither of them, they just said it was a Btac issue. There you go. But thank you for that. Yeah, but I would like this committee to certainly have sight and comment on both. Thank you. So I'd like to thank you all for your attendance. If anyone else has any more comments to make, I'd just like to thank you all for attending. Again, thank our guests. It was very good of you to give up your time this evening, and I really thank you for your participation and your support of this committee. So on that, I will close the meeting. I thank you all for attending, and I'll just say to you all, just keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a nice evening. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.